Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea Talk, a Chinese American museum program, hereon referred to as CAM. My name is Lan Ong, and I am Managing Director of Hop Fung. My family business has been importing tea and Chinese herbs for 35 years, and I have been immersed in the tea culture since a little girl. Tea has a 5,000-year history spanning across multiple cultures, and I am so happy to host this Tea Talk series with CAM. I'm excited to see the enthusiasm and interest from all of you, our audience, in exploring the wonderful world of tea. I'd like to thank the Friends of the Chinese American Museum Board and our staff for making this possible. We'd also like to thank our community partners, Chinese Historical Society of Southern California, Chinese American Citizens Alliance, the Los Angeles Lodge, and the OCA GLA. There are a few items that I'd like to point out. This program will be recorded for archival purposes and may be made public for viewing in the future. Please keep your microphone and video off for the duration of the program. At the end of the program, we will ask you to please turn your video on to take a group photo. For the best experience, we ask participants to please choose speaker view by moving your cursor to the top right, clicking on speaker view if you are using a computer. At the end, if time permits, we will host a Q&A towards the end of the program, so you may post your questions in the chat box throughout the duration of the program. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please send us a chat message to the Chinese American Museum for assistance. For our program tonight, I am so honored to have two very amazing women. Renowned author Lisa See, who will share with us her inspiration for her best-selling book, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane. Lisa teamed up with Linda Louie, tea educator and owner of Bana Tea Company, to conduct her research. Tonight, Linda and Lisa will talk about their experience traveling to China to research Pu'er tea and will provide us with the traditional tea demonstration. If you would like to purchase Lisa's book, we will post a link and promo code in the chat box. We have worked with Vroman's Bookstore exclusively to provide you with a signed bookplate by Lisa See inside the cover and a special page of recommended readings about tea curated by Linda. Please use the promo code TEATALK when you place your order. I'd like to welcome Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Welcome. Lisa is a New York Times bestselling author. Her many books include On Gold Mountain, which tells the story of her Chinese American family settlement in Los Angeles. Lisa has also written a mystery series that takes place in China, and her books have been published in 39 languages. She was named National Woman of the Year by the Organization of Chinese American Women. Lisa helped develop and curate the Family Discovery Gallery at the Autry Museum, an interactive space for children and their families that focuses on Lisa's biracial and bicultural family. In 2003, she curated the Chinese American Museum's inaugural exhibition, a retrospective of artist Tyrus Wong. As a longtime trustee of the University of California Press Foundation, she endowed the Lisa See Endowment Fund in Southern California History and Culture. You may learn more about her at lisasee.com, as well as follow her on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Next, I'd like to introduce Linda Louie. Hi, Linda. Welcome. Linda grew up in Hong Kong and is the owner of Bana Tea, an online tea company specializing in Pu'er tea. She is a tea enthusiast and a tea educator. Linda studied under a renowned Pu'er tea master, Vesper Chan, in Hong Kong, and has traveled extensively to tea-producing regions around the world in her effort to source the best teas and study local tea cultures. Linda regularly gives tea lectures and tastings at various museums, including the Huntington Library and Gardens, public libraries, community colleges, regional tea festivals, and the World Tea Expo. She has been profiled in Imbibe, a popular beverage magazine. The program will now start with Lisa. Everyone, please welcome Lisa, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Lan, and thank you to everyone who's come tonight. You know, these are such strange times and we can't all be together in person, but it is wonderful that I can see some little boxes there of people, and I just am so grateful that you all came from all over the place. So first, I do want to thank the Chinese American Museum for hosting this tonight. I have had a long affiliation with the museum, even before it was a museum. I did research with Sue Ellen for my first book about the Chinese side of my family on Gold Mountain. As you heard in the introduction, my cousin and I curated the inaugural exhibition at the museum. I've donated many objects to the museum. I set Shanghai Girls, one of my books, in the building, the Garnier building where the museum is housed. And my own family has so many ties to that block and to Los Angeles, Chinatown. So I am just thrilled and honored to be here. So how this is going to work is first I'm going to talk a little bit about the inspiration for this book. Now, it begins with an Aka ethnic minority saying that says, no coincidence, no story. And this certainly played out for me as I was writing the book. I had one coincidence after another that led me step by step by step to this particular story. The first the thing that happened was my husband and I were going to the movies in Santa Monica, and we were crossing the street, and I saw up ahead of us an older white couple walking with their adopted teenage Chinese daughter between them. And she had her hair up in a ponytail, and it was swishing back and forth like this. And I had a vision of her as being kind of like a fox spirit in her family. Now, some of you know fox spirits can be quite naughty, quite mischievous. They're always doing things like sneaking into a scholar's study late at night, and there he's studying hard for the imperial exams, and then she has sex with him. So naughty and mischievous. But in their best moments, fox spirits have the ability to bring great love and to create families. And so when I saw this girl's foxtail, swishing back and forth, I thought, well, yes, she truly is like a fox spirit in this family, in the sense that through her presence, she had brought great love and it helped to create a family. And so by the time I got from one side of the street to the next side of the street, I knew what I was going to be writing next. I finally had my way in to a story about adoption from China and the one-child policy. This was something I had been thinking about for about 20 years because it really related to my own family background. My family is Chinese. I obviously don't look very Chinese, if at all, but my family has had long ties in Los Angeles, Chinatown. My great-grandfather was kind of the godfather patriarch of Los Angeles, Chinatown in the 1910s and 20s. And today in Los Angeles, or at least when I was a little girl, I had about 400 relatives in Los Angeles. There were about a dozen that looked like me, the majority still full Chinese, and then this little spectrum in between. And so when I was a little girl and I looked around me, what I saw were Chinese faces. What I experienced was Chinese culture, Chinese tradition, Chinese language, Chinese food. And of course, that's why I write the kinds of books that I do. But along the way, I did notice that I didn't look like everyone else in the family. And there were times when I would wonder, well, what am I? Am I Chinese? Am I American? Am I Chinese American? Or am I something else? And as this one-child policy started, and more girls were adopted here in the United States, not so much when they were babies, but as they started to get older, to the age when I had started to question my own identity, I started wondering about these girls. Had they, had this same experience? I live in Los Angeles, and I think sometimes if you're in a really big city like Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, places of great diversity and of great access. But suppose you had been, a girl had been adopted in a very small town somewhere in the middle of the country. I thought, well, she could be the only Chinese face in her family, the only Chinese face in her class, in her school, in her church, in her synagogue, at the county fair. And had these girls also wondered, you know, what am I? Am I American because of how I was raised? Am I Chinese because of how I look? Am I Chinese American, or am I something else? So that's what set me on this path. Now, I do write historical novels. This doesn't sound too terribly historical. After all, the one-child policy was only around for 30 years, but I didn't worry about that. I just started doing the research that I could. Then about 3 months later, I was giving a talk at a library down by San Diego, and this was a huge event. So big, in fact, that they had brought someone in to do a tea demonstration. It was kind of like the opening act, you know, who's going to do this tea demonstration up on the stage. And I got to sit up on the stage with him, and he was pouring tea, and I got to taste it. And 600 people watched me sip tea, which was, I thought, a little weird, but okay. And he talked a bit about the history of tea. He talked about the tea horse road. He talked about the difference between tea trees and tea shrubs. And then he spoke very specifically about Pu'er tea. And Linda will be talking, both of us will be talking more about that in a little bit. But then he said this one thing, that just that year, which now would have to be about 6 years ago, there was a single cake of Pu'er, a little under a pound, that had just sold at international auction for the equivalent of 150,000 US dollars. And when I heard that, I knew what my historic backdrop was going to be. And so I went home and I started doing research about tea in general and Pu'er very specifically. Now, a couple months after that, my husband was at a board meeting, and one of the men came up to him and said, so, you know, what's Lisa working on these days? Now, my husband loves me very much. I can say that in all honesty, but he doesn't always pay total attention to what I do. So this man asked my husband, so what's Lisa working on? You know, and my husband was like, I don't know, something about tea? And this guy, oh, is she writing about Pu'er? And my husband was like, you know, something about tea. And this man wrote to me the next day and asked, are you writing about Pu'er? And yes, in fact, I was. It turned out that just the week before, he had been at a big banquet out in the San Gabriel Valley, where he was seated next to a woman who is the largest importer of Pu'er into the United States. The company is called Lan Ong, and her name is Elaine. And he asked if I would like to meet her. And of course, the answer was a big yes. And when we made this plan, it was actually to meet at Linda Louie's house and have a tea tasting. And I could meet Linda and I could meet Elaine, and we would drink tea all day, which in fact is what we did. And we'll talk more about that in a second. I just want to say, though, that you know, we were drinking these just amazing teas. The one down there by San Diego, that was fine, but these were exquisite teas, because what I could say is that both Linda and Elaine not only are purveyors of tea, but they're also serious collectors and serious connoisseurs. Anyway, we were drinking tea all day, and at the end I was getting ready to drive home. And for those of you who've been to a tea tasting, you know how it's a lot like a wine tasting, but the big difference, of course, is after a tea tasting, you can still drive home. So anyway, I'm getting ready to drive home, and I said to Linda, you know, I've planned a trip to go to Yunnan during tea picking season. Is there any place you think I should go? Anyone you think I should meet? And she said, well, I'm going for tea picking season. Why don't you just travel with me? And so, you know, off we went about 6 weeks later. And again, we'll talk about the trip in a few minutes. But while we were there, I was thinking a lot ahead of time about who I would write about. You know, Yunnan is a very interesting province in China in the sense that it has incredible biodiversity. With plants, with animals, but also with humans. And so China has 55 ethnic minorities, in addition to the Han majority, who make up the majority of the country. Of those 55 ethnic minorities, 26 of them are in Yunnan. And so before I went on the trip, I looked at all 26, thinking about which one did I want to write about. And by the time we left on this trip, I had narrowed it down to 5. I think the one that I really thought that I would be writing about were the Dai people. And the Dai are very prominent in Yunnan. They are very involved in tea. They also have their own written language, which of course for anybody doing research is always, you know, a huge benefit. But I always go on these trips with an open mind. And so Linda and I were, you know, doing this trip and visiting farmers and visiting with the tea master and all of these things. But there did come a day when we met with or visited an Aka ethnic minority family, really well known for the quality of tea that they grow. They've been growing tea in their family for generations, growing and processing it. And so people come from all over the world to meet with this family. And so there we were at their home and, you know, again, drinking tea all day long. And Abu, the daughter who was pouring the tea for us, she reminded me a lot of myself half my age, but a lot of myself in the sense that she loved to collect stories and she loved to tell stories. And so she started telling these stories about her mother and her grandmother, her own personal story. I used a lot of the details in The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane. She had also collected stories from the elders in her village, but also from the elders on her side of Lan Ong Mountain. And so by the time lunch came around on that first day, I knew that I would be writing about the Aka, and all that other research went right out the window. Just a couple of words about the Aka. They are a very unique culture. They have been described as being quite similar, actually, to the Cree Indians in this country. They're animistic. They believe that every single thing has a soul. Even a single grain of rice has a soul. They wear these the women wear these very elaborate headdresses that have silver and feathers and bones and coins and just, you know, all kinds of things. They can weigh anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds. They're just beautiful and elaborate. I have photos of them on my website if you're curious about them. They have certain traditions that are, again, unique to their culture. They have what's called a swing festival, where they build a kind of a crazy swing on a edge of a mountain, and they swing out, you know, and this is all part of searching for the right girl to marry. And they build these special gates into each village that protects the village. And these two are quite unique, and not just to the culture, but really to all of China. So the whole thing was just fascinating. And like I said, one thing led to another, but at the highlight of all of the research I did was our trip to China. And so now I'd like to bring in Linda so that we can tell you a little bit about that trip. Hi, Linda.
Hi. Great memories.
Yeah. So, of course, we flew from Los Angeles to Guangzhou. And may we have the first slide, please? Oh, how about the first slide? Can we have the first slide? It'll come in a second. So actually, this first slide is when Linda and I met that very first time to drink tea. I think I'm just going to speak for myself and say I looked a lot younger then. Linda drinks a lot more Pu'er than I do, so she just looks young forever. Next slide. So our first stop was in Guangzhou, and we went to the Fangsun tea market. This is, Linda, am I right? It's the largest tea market in the world. And this is just one building of what several blocks of buildings like this. And inside you'll find big shops selling tea ware, but also a lot of just small booths. And, you know, that might be just 10 by 10 feet. So you can imagine just how many purveyors there are in this one area. The next slide. So when we got to Yunnan, we were able to spend several days with Linda's tea master Vesper Chen. That's the man in the gray vest. And well, of course, how could you go to China and just not eat all the time? So we were eating a lot. But this was when we went out pretty far up into the mountains to a tea processing, I hesitate to call it a factory because it wasn't that big, but a tea processing, what would you call it, Linda?
It's called a primary processing center.
Yeah, but still very small and unique to growing and processing Pu'er in the traditional artisanal way. The next photo. So I'm sure many of you who are watching have either seen tea terraces in person or have seen photos like the one that's on the bottom there. And you know, these tea terraces, these are clones. No matter where you go in the world, every tea plant like this, terrace tea, it's all cloned. And so they're all identical. And they've been cultivated and manicured into that shape so that you can easily walk by and just pick off the top. Now on the top photo, these are tea trees. And you can see these are the original trees that grow wild. Some of them are left over that have survived from old tea plantations, you know, hundreds of years ago. And these trees can be 200, 400, 800, 1,000 years old. There's one tea tree in China, 2,700 years old, that they know was cultivated for tea. Next slide. And then I think I turn it over to Linda.
Okay, it was a great pleasure to travel with Lisa, and I couldn't believe that it was 2014. It's been 6 years since. So, you know, where we were was in Mongseng, near the Manghai area. So then afterwards, then we went to Nanhuo Mountain to visit a friend of mine, and Atu. Atu is the brother of Abu. And so we also, over there, we learned the processing of Pu'er. And so like all teas, you know, processing starts with picking, you know, plugging. So if you look at this photo carefully, you can see the face of a person kind of at the top of the tree. Now, plugging from an ancient tea tree is very labor intensive, is also very risky. So as you can see that it's a pretty labor intensive job. So after picking, next slide, then it's withering. So what withering does is to allow the leaves to lose a little moisture. And then usually it takes about a couple of hours in a good day, and it could take up to 10 hours if it's a rainy day. And also to allow the leaves to be a little softer. Next slide. So here is Lisa learning how to fry the leaves. So this process is called shaqing, meaning killing the green. And the purpose is to arrest the enzymes so that the leaves would not go bad. It would not oxidize. So the leaves are, so in this wok, there are 8 kilos of fresh leaves. So as you can see, it's a pretty labor intensive job.
And I'll say, not only is it hot, but it is really hard because it is 8 kilos, so it's very heavy. You can even see my little muscles are trying so working.
You did well. Yeah, and then you have to kind of fluff the leaves for a pretty extended period of time until it's dry. Next slide. So this process is called rolling or kneading or twisting. And the purpose is for the leaves to, you want to break the cellular structure of the leaves so that the juice can come out. And this process requires a lot of practice and a lot of experience. And that's why you don't see a picture of us doing that, because the pressure has to be very even. Otherwise, you know, either the not enough juice will come out, or not enough flavor, or you will have to do it again. Next. So this is sun drying. And sun drying is very unique to Pu'er. In fact, it is in the official definition of Pu'er, all tea leaves needs to be sun dried. So if you ask a local farmers why all teas needs to be sun dried, they would say they want to have the fragrance from the sun. But actually the truth is sun dried leaves are not completely dried, as opposed to if you dry it in an oven. And that little moisture that is left in the leaves will be very conducive to future aging. And so these two pictures, one is from a smaller farmer that they just kind of leave it out in open air. And then the picture on the left is a sort of a greenhouse structure where, you know, there are windows to allow ventilation. And the cover actually is to protect the leaf just in case if it rains. Next slide. So the last processing step is sorting. A lot of times when the picker, when they pick the leaves, they cannot be too precise. So that sometimes there are stems or maybe some mature leaves that are mixed into the good leaves. So that after the processing, they will have to manually remove those leaves because they don't process very well. So, so this is actually Abu's mother doing that.
And can I say about this process for just people who are watching this? This is literally a leaf, a leaf, a leaf at a time. And in all these little villages, you know, in the mountains there, you see sometimes it'll just be one person, sometimes it'll be a group of 5 or 10 sitting around these trays, again, just sorting one leaf at a time. So the next time you drink your cup of tea, just think about all the labor involved.
Right. Next slide. Lisa?
Yeah, so with Pu'er, you know, they're different. You can drink it raw. That just means it's been processed just to the point that you just saw, and it can be as much young as 3 days old. It can also age naturally, and people collect teas that have just been aging by themselves 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Of course, these teas are extraordinarily valuable, but they have also figured out a way to artificially ferment tea. And so this tea master Chen actually invited us into his tea fermentation warehouse, and you can see how big this is. It was kind of about the size of like a football field. The whole compound was surrounded by a wall with barbed wire on the top. They had armed people. I mean, this is what you're looking at is so unbelievably valuable. Anyway, they have these stacks of tea. They put water on it, cover it with burlap, and then it's kind of like a compost heap, you know, that it's inside, it's just starting to ferment naturally. And on this bottom photo, you can see that the tea master has put his hands down in there, and all of us did that. And what's amazing is when your hands are in there, it's warm, it's heating up because it's really alive and changing and evolving just under those pieces of burlap. The next photo. And this is Abu, who I told you about at the beginning. And of course, you know, what's the last step of growing tea? Drinking it. And she is doing this in the very traditional way. And then the last photo. We did go to the very start of the Tea Horse Road, and in this next section of our talk tonight, Linda's going to be talking about the history of the Tea Horse Road. But this it's from Yunnan that tea went in every direction. And so this is at the very start, and it was really fun. We actually, you can see that gentleman at the very end. He was quite elderly, walking with his walking stick, and was quite charming. So I'm going to turn it over now to Linda completely to just talk now a bit about the history of tea and Pu'er.
Okay, can I have the next slide? Okay, yeah, the next slide, right. When I was a little girl, Pu'er, which was known to me as Bana Tea in Cantonese, it was our daily tea in our household. And I remember my mother or my grandmother would each morning took a handful of tea leaves and then put it in this large thermos, pour hot water in it, and then tea would be served from this thermos all day long. If they needed more tea, and they just add hot water. So, and also when we went to dim sum, Pu'er was always sort of like the default tea. And everybody told me that, that the reason for that was Pu'er can help us reduce or to reduce the grease in our stomach after we had the greasy food. Now, I remember Pu'er as a very, very dark, very sort of earthy tea that sort of reminded me of the bitter medicine, the Chinese medicine like fu cha, you know, that I had to drink when I was sick. So as you can see, Pu'er was not really my kind of tea. I was not a big fan of it. However, Pu'er has made a really big comeback in recent decades. It has transformed into a collectible and a tea that is highly regarded by tea connoisseurs. And it even to a point that it inspired Lisa See to write a book about it. So what is the hype about Pu'er tea? Next slide. First of all, I think Pu'er has a really long history. It has been around since the beginning of tea. And in fact, I think it is believed that the original species, the original Assamica variety found in Yunnan called Yunnan Daye is the original species of all tea. And back in about the Tang Dynasty, 7th century, Pu'er tea was traded for war horses in Tibet. So 60 kilos of Pu'er tea were loaded onto each animal. So via animal caravans or human porters through this really arduous route would transport the tea to Tibet. Now, this very important trade route is now called the ancient tea horse route, Chama Budao. Next slide. So Pu'er is also very valued for its age. So this is a photo of tea cakes, vintage tea cakes, ranging from 1940s to all the way to 1970s. So each of these cakes actually represents the social, political, and historical background of the time. So for example, the one on the upper left represents a cake made in the 40s, before 1949, which is the year that People's Republic of China was formed. So teas made before that usually have no paper wrapping, and they were all made by these family-owned small tea factories. So after 1949, teas that were made in the 50s and the 60s and beyond, they were made by the state-owned factories, and there were 4 state-owned factories in Yunnan that makes Pu'er tea. And tea cakes that were made in, say, for example, in the late 50s reflects the Great Leap Forward campaign, where a lot of tea trees, these old tea trees, were chopped down or they were over-harvested. So a lot of destructions were done to the tea trees at that time. And I think Lisa's book also mentioned that. So come 60s and the 70s, that's when the Cultural Revolution erupted. So during that time, anything old is bad. So old tea cakes were burned, and these old tea tree gardens were abandoned. And instead, the government planted very wide scale tea plantations planted by cuttings, by cloning, and because productivity was really the focus at that time. Next slide. So we're very happy to say that once again, we rediscovered the beauty of these old tea tree gardens. So these tea tree gardens have been around and have been surviving on their own without any human management for centuries. And the beauty of the teas made from these tea gardens is that it is believed that the teas from these leaves have higher nutritional value and mineral content. So these trees were planted by seeds, so they are very genetically diverse. So each tree actually has its own DNA, so that the resulting tea will be a little more nuanced, will be more layered in flavor, and also it's fuller in body. So a lot of connoisseurs really fascinated with teas made by these old tea trees. Keep in mind that not all Pu'er are made from this kind of material. In fact, most of them don't, but the premium ones are. Next slide. So this is a photo of how a Pu'er tea can transform from day one to 30 years later. As you can see, the color of the tea, the texture of the tea, well, you can see the texture, but when it gets to be very old, the tea actually became a little very, very kind of earthy and also kind of medicinal. And and it is a flavor, a flavor profile that is highly sought after by tea connoisseurs. And not only people want aged tea for the flavors, they are actually looking for emotional reactions from these teas. And everybody's reaction would be different, but to me, drinking old teas is pretty much like listening to your favorite oldies. It makes you nostalgic, and it transports me back in time quite often. So I think, and some people even have experience of, being euphoric, or they would perspire. So all kinds of reactions, and that's what the allure of aged Pu'er. Next slide. So it takes decades to age a tea, and not everybody can wait that long. So then in the mid-1970s, the tea factories, Kunming factory to be specific, in Yunnan, experimented and developed a method. It's called udoi in Chinese, and it basically is a fermentation process whereby you can transform a very young tea into a taste profile that is very close to like a 30-year-old tea. So earlier you saw the slide of the fermentation center. So actually from a raw Pu'er to a ripe Pu'er, meaning the one that has been fermented, it only takes up to maybe several months. So in that amount of time, the tea leaves can change and then would give you that kind of taste profile. However, a ripe Pu'er can never replace the types of body reaction that aged raw Pu'er can give you. So today we have two major kinds of Pu'er. We have a raw Pu'er, or sheng in Chinese, or a ripe Pu'er, or some people call it cooked, or in Chinese it's called shu Pu'er. Next slide. So Pu'er's boom and its rise in popularity actually has improved the livelihood of a lot of the tea farmers in the region. This is an area of, it's called Laobanjiang. It's a very, very famous region in Yunnan, and this is how it looked in 2008. Next slide. This is what this village looks like today. I took this photo in 2017, and a lot of the farmers get wealthy, and then they rebuilt their homes, including many guest rooms in their homes to accommodate tea buyers. So next slide. And this is how the tea was dried. Like in the past, it would be on a ledge on top of the roof. But today, wealthy tea farmers can have these sort of greenhouse-like structure to protect the tea leaves. It will not get as dusty, and then it will protect it from the rain. Next slide. So this is the entrance to the Laobanjiang village. The one on the left, the picture was taken in 2008, and the one on the right is the grand entrance that was built recently. So every year, thousands of tea buyers, connoisseurs, local tourists would flock to this area in the hope to buy some authentic Laobanjiang tea. And I have heard stories that people actually sleep underneath the tea trees to make sure that their tea will not be adulterated. Next slide. So the good news is that with the boom in Pu'er tea, all the tea farmers are really big on protecting these trees. And they know the value of these trees. And this is a photo of a young tea garden. So some tea farmers actually even create these new tea gardens using the same method as their ancestors. These were all planted by seeds, all fall apart. So in several hundred years later, this one will be an ancient tea garden. And they would like to sustain the same ecosystem for the future. Next. So the downside of the boom is that it created opportunities for some people who want to make a quick buck by cheating people. This is a photo of a fake Hongmin, the red label, which is a very famous tea cake from the 50s. And so these people, these unscrupulous merchants, you know, they would either mislabel the tea, they mislabel the age of the tea, the quality of the tea, or they would just do counterfeits. So actually mislabeling in the tea industry is actually pretty pervasive all over the world, but particularly for the Pu'er tea. And actually, for example, the Laobanjiang that I mentioned earlier, I was told one year that there were 5 times, just for the in Fangcheng, the Guangzhou tea market, there were 5 times as many Laobanjiang tea as it was actually produced. Next slide. So this is a setup that if you have ever been to a tea shop in China, this will not be unfamiliar to you. This is a Gongfu tea brewing setup. And if you have never been to a tea shop in China, it's okay because we're gonna do a demonstration for you. So we would like to bring Lisa back. Next. Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Okay.
There we are, side by side.
All right. So first of all, I'm going to demonstrate. A lot of people ask me, you know, how do you get the tea leaves out of a tea cake? So this is a tea cake. It's a small tea cake. And Lisa, you have one too, right?
I do, but mine's already been opened. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, we're going to do a parallel tea brewing here.
Yeah, and let's just explain to everyone, my water, is it making too much noise? Is it starting to heat up? I don't know if you all can hear it. But, you know, when I'm out talking to people, they ask, like, what do you do with the tea cake? And you'll see how Linda does it is the truly, truly traditional way. But I'm just here to show you that you don't need to have all of the beautiful equipment. You don't have to, you know, do it perfectly. You can just do it like I do it sometimes. And so here's, this isn't even a full tea cake. Mine has already been in, I've been in it. And Linda, you have your.
This is a full tea cake. So what you do is you need a pick. So you either have a fancy pick like I do, or you can use any letter opener or ice pick. So what you do is you stick this away from your hand into the side of the tea cake, okay? And then you just kind of wiggle it around, up and down, and then you can just take out whatever leaves that you need for your brewing. And that would determine on by, you know, how big your teapot or your gaiwan is. Okay, so I'm done. It's very easy. So I'll put it right here on a Pu'er tray.
Now, see, I don't have the Pu'er tray, so and you're gonna see Linda's gonna use a gaiwan. I'm just gonna use a regular little glass teapot. It has a little little sieve like this. This is not the perfect way to do it, but it does work, especially if, like I am right now, on vacation. So Linda's gonna pour hers in her thing, and I'm pouring mine in.
Before I brew the tea, usually in the Gongfu way, you warm up all your tea utensils first. So the Gongfu tea brewing method actually originates in a small town in Guangzhou called Qiuzhou. And you have the same water kettle.
I do.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason to warm up your utensils is, you know, to make sure that the temperature is consistent. In case you're wondering where I pour my water, I have a little tube that goes into a bucket.
And I have a bowl.
Yes, you can use that. Okay, all the tea utensils are warmed. And then I'm going to put the tea leaves in the gaiwan. This is a gaiwan, which means a lidded bowl. So I have about 4 grams of tea leaves right here. So before brewing, you want to make it a rinse. You give the tea leaves a rinse, and that is for 2 purposes. One is to, you know, I guess give it a wash. And then the second is to allow the leaves to expand, because all the pores are compressed and then they're not so readily to release the flavor. But then after the rinse, they're all sort of expanded. So, oh, you're already done.
Well, I'm just rinsing it, and then
Okay, all right.
one of the nice things you can do is after you've rinsed it and you've poured out the water, you can smell it. Oh, look what it did to my glasses. But it's
I do that.
a way to get a real sense of the aroma, and even just like Linda did, just even the lid will carry that aroma.
So with this method, you actually don't need to brew your tea for very long. You can brew it for usually for the first steeping is 10 seconds. There we go.
You're a little ahead of me.
Because you have a larger teapot.
Yeah, my little teapot. And here's my.
And I have a right Pu'er. That's why it's so dark. Cheers.
Cheers. And I'll just also say one of my favorite tea sayings is drink tea, make friends. And so, yes, to Linda.
Lisa and I have been very good friends since.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Linda. Lisa, we appreciate you sharing your very personal story about identity, which I believe some of us may be able to relate to, and the beautiful Aka Chinese minority in your book. Linda, thank you for the amazing presentation and the vast knowledge that you've shared about Pu'er. And I think we've definitely all gained a sense of appreciation for the intense labor, process, and care that's used to produce the leaves for your next cup of Pu'er tea. So what I'd like to do now is review some of the questions. Wow, we have quite a lot. So we have a very interactive audience. Let me go ahead and get started. So we have some general questions about Pu'er. I'll direct these to Linda. The audience wants to know what it smells like, the caffeine content, and the shelf life. Would you like to answer, please?
Well, I'll go backwards. There is no limits of shelf life for Pu'er because Pu'er is an aged tea, is treasured for its ability to age. So you can age it for 30 years, 40 years. And then in terms of the caffeine content, all teas have caffeine, okay? It is part of the tea compound. Sometimes how to measure the caffeine content, sometimes depending on how much tea leaves that you use, and also depending on the brewing time. So if usually all the caffeine content will be leached out in about 3 minutes. So as you can see, when I do this Kung Fu method, I use about 10 seconds. So you're only doing, taking out just a partial caffeine. And the first question is what?
They also wanted to know what it smelled like. I know you did talk a little bit about that. Mm-hmm.
It really depends on the type, and it depends on the location, the producing region. And Pu'er is kind of like wine. It has various, famous producing region like Laobanjiang that I mentioned earlier. And then you have Yiwu. And each location actually has its own microclimate. And if you're into wine, you understand the different terroir in the area, which is the soil and the mountain, shading the tea leaf. So they're all very different. Some are a little bit plummy. Some of them are very earthy, like in ripe Pu'er, and some of them are like more camphor, depending on what is around the area.
Okay. And to follow that, why is Pu'er in cake form as opposed to being loose leaf?
Okay, that has to do with history. I think I have mentioned about the tea horse route, the teas being transported by animal caravan, and it's really the loose leaf takes up a lot of space. And also if there's an accident or if it rains, the whole, it can fall all over. But tea cakes actually is a lot more compact. And today, of course, we don't do that for transport reasons. Today we do it for, it is a lot more space efficient to store and to age your tea cakes. And also at the same time is a little bit more contained, is more stable. Whereas, in loose leaf form, you're exposed to a lot of oxygen. So sometimes the aging may not be as contained and consistent.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Linda.
Which is, I know in my family that, people would give us tea cakes. We'd give other people tea cakes. If you ever go to China and, you're visiting family or friends or there for business, often you're given a tea cake. And I do hope that what part of what tonight does is tells you, it's okay to go into that tea cake and drink it. You don't have to just keep it as a gift. You can use it, you can drink it and try it.
Right, and then you can age it along the way. I mean, it's not like once you open it, you can't age it anymore. Just, put it back in the paper wrapper and put it away, and it will age as you consume it.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Lisa and Linda. This is a question follow-up with your book. So this is for Lisa. When you write, not research, do you continue to immerse yourself in the culture of which you are writing about? For example, do you eat the foods, listen to the music, drink tea specifically for that area?
Yes, 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 and yes. I'll say that with this particular book, I've always been a tea drinker, but with this particular book, I turned into a tea snob. I will just admit it.
And it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing.
Right.
Great. And I have a question here from Laura. She says, here in the US, many Western doctors seem to discourage tea based on caffeine, for example, raising blood pressure, or even the tannins that may be bad for your stomach, such as acid reflux. She'd like to know, are there certain types of teas or teas in general that give a bad rap in China, or is it just that Western doctors do not fully understand tea?
Well, all I can say is that teas are not made equal. So, I think in terms of the nutritional content and, how much caffeine and all that has to do with the quality of tea. If you consume a good tea planted in a good way, not a lot of chemicals, I think you take care of all the problems. And the ones that are bad for you are the ones that are grown in low elevations, that use a lot of chemicals, and they're not well tended and not well processed. So quality actually is everything.
But can I say one other thing about this, which is, so, you know, tea obviously has caffeine in it, but tea also has phenols. Am I pronouncing that right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with phenols, you know how sometimes people say, oh, I need a cup of tea in the morning to wake me up. But also if something bad has happened or you're not feeling well, you have a cup of tea for comfort. That's because the phenols have a property in them that are very calming. And so with these really high quality Pu'er teas, yes, you have the caffeine, but there's so many phenols and all these different attributes in them that they're really kind of pushing down the effect of the caffeine, that you have more of a sense of well-being.
Right, which makes it a more balanced tea. And that phenol is called L-theanine, and it's a calming agent. So I believe this is, you know, what I believe is that, for example, the tea trees, they're on their own. You know, you don't have to make it grow. And then it would just very naturally balance some of the compounds, you know, within the leaves. And as you said, Lisa, then you have caffeine, and then you also have the L-theanine sort of balance it.
Great.
And then one other thing, I know we're kind of limited on time here. I think we've already gone over, but that's okay. That what Linda just said, that these trees have survived on their own, you know, sometimes for hundreds of years. Nobody's been watering them. No one's been pruning them. No one's been spraying them. No one's been coming and picking off the bugs. They've really had to survive on their own. And so they actually have a very high amount of antioxidants in them, you know, because that's what protects them, the trees, to live hundreds of years. And it turns out that those antioxidants are also very good for us. So while it's, you know, if you drink some Lipton tea, you're not going to get that kind of effect. But with these ancient trees, you do get the benefit of the antioxidants and the phenols.
Right, right. And it also has a very deep and expansive root system, which is a good way to combat climate change.
Oh, fantastic. So maybe we can all withstand the elements and not age just like the Pu'er teas by drinking it, correct, Linda? Okay, and lastly, sorry, just for the sake of time, I'll take the last question here. The audience would like to know, Linda and Lisa, what are each of your favorite teas and why?
You want to go first, Lisa?
Well, I love Pu'er. I drink it all day long. I actually, instead of a little cup like this, I use a big cup like that. I love to have the raw Pu'er in the morning. I love that kind of astringency and grassy taste. And then as the day goes on, I prefer something that's older and aged and more mellow. But I also really love Iron Goddess of Mercy. And then I actually buy from Linda a true jasmine tea. And that is just unlike anything I have ever tasted. So I would say those are my three main ones. How about for you, Linda?
You know, I like all good teas, but then on a daily basis, if I have to choose one, I have to say I always drink raw Pu'er. I love raw Pu'er because I like the body. It is very rich. The mouthfeel is very rich. And also, you know, good Pu'er, it calms me down. I mean, I don't care how frazzled I am. Usually after a cup of tea, I feel really calm. I feel very kind of grounded. So definitely raw Pu'er.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda and Lisa, for being part of this program. For now, I'd like to ask the audience to please stay. We'd like to take a virtual group photo. So if you are willing to participate, we'd love to see all of you. Please go ahead and click on the bottom and turn on your camera now. But if you don't want to, it's fine, you can leave it off. And our CAM staff, Alyssa, she will guide us through taking the group photo. Great, thank you, Alyssa. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and we hope you enjoyed the program. I love these virtual programs, even though we can't get together, because we can get global participation. I've taken a look at our audience, and I've noticed most of us come from all over the US, and I believe we have even someone from Canada, as well from Singapore. So welcome and thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow the link in the chat box right now to purchase the Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, and remember to enter the promo code TEATALK into the order comment section before completing your purchase. Please also visit Linda's website for only authentic and quality Pu'er tea, banateacompany.com, as well as visit hopfung.com for all your tea and accessories needs. I hope you enjoyed the evening's program, and tonight's program is only the kickoff event of CAM's Tea Talk series. The series will span over several live programs. We're going to take our audience on a journey into the fascinating history of tea. Topics will range from exploring the different types of teas, cultural influences, the tea growing regions around the world, its health benefits, as well as how to brew and enjoy your perfect cuppa. So please sign up on our mailing list for all the updates for this series, as we have really exciting programming ahead. Some upcoming programs that CAM has for the next month includes a virtual kids story time in partnership with the Chinatown Branch Library on Thursday, October 1st at 4 p.m. We'll be reading Round is a Mooncake in celebration of the Mid-Autumn Moon Festival. Our annual History Makers Awards Gala will be virtual this year on October 20th from 7 to 8 p.m. This year's theme is Warriors Shaping a New Future. Join us as we honor some very special members of the community. So be sure to follow CAM on Facebook, on Instagram, and stay up to date on our upcoming events, as well as our next installment of the Tea Talk series. And we're glad that you joined us this evening for the program. And it is programs throughout the year that we offer free to the public, which is made possible by the generosity of our wonderful donors. So if you would like to become a donor, please visit camla.org or follow the donation link provided in the chat box. Donations of any amount are welcome and appreciated. We'd love to hear your feedback about tonight's program. You will be sent a follow-up email in the following days that will include a brief survey. Your comments will help us to develop exciting and future educational programs. Thank you all, and good night.